Hello and welcome to another edition of 40's on the 80's, where we discuss, dissect, and sometimes trash our favorite movies, shows, and music from the 80's. And everything in the 80's is fair game, and today I am joined by my fellow film analysts, ravishing Rick Baldwin, contributing member of Kentucky's annual Scare Fest, which has grown in recent years. Hi, Rick.
Oh, hello. Thanks for the ravishing part.
We are also joined today by my brother, Rob Not the Zombie Redman, who started his marriage off in a way that I think would have impressed any fan of horror films. Welcome back, Rob.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to always be on the podcast.
All right, and would just for those who don't know, would you mind describing how you proposed to your wife?
Sure. So a little bit of background. My wife and I met because we were at a Halloween costume party. I was dressed as Freddy Krueger at the time. She liked my costume. She asked me to dance with her, and we've been together ever since. We went to a haunted house in St. Louis, Missouri called The Darkness, and she was sitting in an electric chair. She thought I was going to turn it on, and I pulled out the ring. Then I turned it on. It's been electrifying.
Once again, I am your moderator, Johann Redman, and today's episode begins with some discrepancies. I'm no longer in my 40s, and today's film isn't from the 80s. So join us today for our three-act overview of the 1978 horror film landmark, John Carpenter's Halloween, which introduced us to Jamie Lee Curtis and reintroduced us to Donald Pleasence, who had previously matched wits against James Bond and eluded his Nazi captors in The Great Escape.
Halloween night. A small American town. 15 years ago.
I spent 8 years trying to reach him, and then another 7 trying to keep him locked up because I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil. I think he'll come back.
Halloween. The night he came home.
And then spoilers ahead. For those of you who have never seen this film, here's a quick breakdown of the plot, and you guys feel free to jump in and correct me if I get any of this off base, but just a brief synopsis. So on Halloween night in 1963, a 6-year-old Michael Myers dons a mask and brutally murders his older sister and is locked up in a mental institution. 15 years later, he escapes, and his psychiatrist tracks him back to his hometown in Haddonfield, where he has begun stalking young Laurie Strode after he sees her drop off a key at his childhood home. He acquires the tools he needs to terrorize young Laurie and her friends, while his psychiatrist teams with the police to try and catch this land shark, if you will. We learn along the way that Michael is no ordinary psycho, and his mythology is only getting started. So let's break this film down into its 3 acts. And as a reminder, the 3-act structure is a model used in narrative fiction that divides a story into 3 parts. So part 1, act 1, is the setup, usually used to establish characters, their relationships, the world they live in, and some sort of dynamic incident usually occurs at the end of this first act where the main character is forced to make a decision. Like in Die Hard, Bruce Willis had to decide at the party, is he going to fight or is he going to run and hide? That was the end of that Act 1. We'll figure out Act 1 for this. Act 2 is the confrontation, and it is the rising action, and the characters find themselves in worsening situations. New skills might be learned. They arrive at a higher sense of awareness of who they are and what they're capable of. And that leads into Act 3, which is the resolution. The main tensions of the story are brought to climax, and hopefully loose ends are tied up. So, Rick, since you are practiced in 3-act structure here, what are your thoughts on where the 3 acts start and stop? And I also wanted to throw out, too, as I was thinking about this, who's the protagonist and antagonist in this film?
I was thinking about that last night, but before I give you my rundown, for you, and us doing the 3-act for a straight-up horror movie, did you find this movie easier or harder to find the transition as opposed to the action movies we've been mostly covering?
That's a great question, and I did struggle with that a little bit. I never came to a clear-cut resolution. with Halloween, I kind of felt like it was broken down again, like we used outfits in The Running Man. In this film, I almost felt like time of day played a key role. So once the sun went down on Halloween, I think that's where we sort of entered into Act 2, at least in my mind.
All right. For the end of my Act 1, I believe, because Act 1 is all the setup of your characters and your background. I would say that Act 1 ends when Michael steals the car and drives from the insane asylum.
Well, what decision's being made there? His decision to steal a car?
It's not on him because he's not the actual... Jamie Lee Curtis is the protagonist.
Right, right.
But at the time of that scene, because the way they do the character development, and it's probably just was done indirectly because they're just writing the movie. At that scene, Loomis would be, he is the center of that scene. So
right.
I'm thinking that's where the transition goes. So it would be when Michael escapes. And then when Act 2 transitions to Act 3, it's with Loomis again. It would be when Loomis finally recognizes the car on the street.
You're making some interesting points here that's making me wonder. You could actually say that we have 3 main characters in this film.
Yes, but I don't think Michael is still the lead.
But he does make decisions, though, right?
Well, yeah, but you know pretty much what his decisions are going to be made. Like, you can kind of guesstimate. But in regards to Laurie, I think it's shared between her and Pleasance, especially with Donald Pleasance, because it seems like the acts always transition on him, not her. She is just the unfortunate bystander of being at the wrong place at the wrong time within this deeper story that she wasn't even aware of.
Right. She's just reacting to everything that is being caused by Michael Myers.
But yeah, but for my act structure, it always transitions on Loomis. And Loomis is always in that scene. So yeah, the Act 1, Michael escapes. Act 2, Dr. Loomis sees the car, and then that's when you have the showdown.
Right. And for my money, I think the showdown is between Jamie Lee Curtis and Michael Myers because they go back and forth inside the house.
Yeah, but you need to have Pleasance there.
Right.
So, yeah. I mean, I knew it was, that's the reason why I asked you that question is because when I was rewatching it, I knew, I don't know, maybe telepathically that you were having some issues with it. And that's why I wanted to bring it up because I could see where it would be murkier trying to watch the way they did the characters.
So, Rob, what do you think about this as far as the act structure? I mean, at what point do you feel like the characters are established and then some sort of decision occurs that sets us off into Act 2?
So let me ask you guys some questions just because I'm still learning this structure, the 3-act structure.
Okay.
From what I've read and looked into, it seems like since it is the setup, can you end an act without having the main character be introduced and set up in a way? Because if you end Act 1 before Laurie's even introduced, even though, you know, obviously she's the final girl, could you even end the Act 1? Because that's why I think like her dropping off the key at the Myers house is a transition.
Interesting. That's a good point. So when the escape at the asylum occurs, we haven't even met Laurie, have we?
No.
Okay, so we have to take that into consideration, absolutely. So we have to meet and establish our entire world and all of our characters. I mean, granted, it can be done in any sort of, chopped up way. But yeah, that's a good point, Rob. And I think that had Laurie never gone to that house, what would have happened?
And that's where it gets, especially after all these, I mean, it's been 50 years of Halloween, roughly, 40, 50 years. And I think a lot of the thinking around the movies gets convoluted with, the 12 sequels that it's had, including the remakes. You start thinking like, well, he was after Laurie, but if that scene hadn't occurred, then, he wouldn't go after Laurie. He would have gone after somebody else. He was just sitting there waiting.
Right. So like all of that backstory about her being his long lost sister and all that stuff came much later. It wasn't part of the original plan.
Correct. That was in Halloween 2.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think as a standalone film, and wiping out all of the following films, had she never gone to that house, I mean, maybe he would have gone after her dad or possibly whoever was looking to buy the place. And why was Michael Myers going home anyways?
Well, and
question.
I mean, when they wrote it, this was the sole intent of Carpenter to do a one and done with this character. And if they were going to do more Halloweens, it'd be a different story each time. As part of like an anthology series. So
like Halloween 3 was.
Yeah. So that more fell in line with Carpenter's vision. Now, in regards to the second one, the only reason why he had to be attached to that, I mean, he didn't direct it, is because they pretty much, to do other projects, he pretty much had to do that. And begrudgingly, he had a write on it. And that's why they added that story, because they were desperate for it. He didn't even want to work on the second one in regards to creating it. So I agree that if we didn't have any of the other sequels, then it wouldn't be so clouded into trying to find all this. I think it was perfect the way it was. Is just, evil is everywhere. Don't give so much of a backstory. I mean, Dr. Loomis gives you all that backstory. We don't need anything more. And the fact that he's just evil, it resonates a lot more. It's creepier. And then when they over-explain everything in the sequels, it waters it down.
Yeah, demystifies. And then, of course, like we've talked about in the past, I mean, you can imagine things 10 times scarier than anybody else can describe to you.
And the fact that in the original, yeah, there's violence, but it's not like 80s slasher gore where they're doing a huge kill count and trying to make where each sequels, they have to go over and over and try to top each other with this more gratuitous stuff. They didn't really do that in here. A lot of stuff is left to your imagination, which makes it creepier.
Right. And I think the interviews and documentaries I've watched, they talked about how they didn't use fake blood. It's like the prop department had fake blood ready, but John Carpenter was like, no, let's not use it.
Well, some of the best horror movies do that. I mean, look at Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's so gruesome. There's not that much blood in it at all compared to what we see now. I mean, there was no nudity. There was no language. There was no really that much blood. But yet, that is a gritty, hard movie for some people to watch.
Okay, so let's get back to our act structure here. And I'm actually going to vote in favor of what Rob described as being the end of Act 1, as Laurie dropping the key off, because we've met our key characters, our settings, and Michael has a target.
Well, another question for you. Can secondary characters be introduced in Act 2? So, like, we still haven't met Annie, Linda yet, because they meet up with Laurie after she drops off.
I think, yeah. I mean, it's not like this is math, I mean, it is very much still an art. So, I mean, you can ebb and flow and, rise and fall. But as far as primary characters and, the main interest of the story, absolutely.
Okay. Just checking.
So, what do you think, Rick? You good with the key being dropped off as the end of Act 1?
I can see it either way, because just the way they do a lot of character development on Laurie, and they do a lot on Dr. Loomis. So we can take it either way.
And what about Act 2 kind of coming to a climax, Rob, as far as leading to the main showdown?
Well, this is where I need probably to hear your guys' opinion first, just because Act 1 seemed pretty easy to me, or at least in that sense. But maybe it goes back to the point of, like, once the sun goes down, that's where the things start occurring, because that's when Michael starts his he's been, following his prey all day, like a cat. And then once the sun goes down, that's when he actually starts the hunt.
Well, that's where I would look at it as, I mean, everything that occurs, all of the stalking and the killing is Act 2. Mm-hmm. Whereas the final showdown between our protagonist and antagonist, and then Loomis even coming into the mix, that's where I feel like when Laurie is having her final showdown, because she gets the most licks in on him too. I mean, I don't think anybody else does any kind of damage to Michael prior to Laurie. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think she's the only one that actually gets some damage on him before he gets shot. So Act 2 still contains the action, because it is the rising action of the characters find themselves in worsening situations. New skills might be learned, and they arrive at a higher sense of awareness of who they are. So when we were describing the movie Die Hard, Act 2 basically was everything, all of the action that was occurring mid-movie up until the big explosion on the roof and the helicopter crashing and Bruce Willis coming back into the building. Because all of the big major action pieces had occurred. And then the only thing that was left was for the final showdown. So we could say that Act 3 begins when Michael is after Laurie. because that's the final.
When she goes across to the street and actually discovers her friends displayed and brutally murdered.
Yeah, so I think that's the transition where she runs back to her house. Tommy lets her in, and then the boogeyman is inside the house with her. Okay. I would say that is the final confrontation.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
Yeah, we can go with that.
Okay. So we've got our 3 acts described. Production notes. This was written by John Carpenter and Deborah Hill. The more I learned about Deborah Hill, the more I really started to feel for her, because I feel like she played a massive role in getting John Carpenter into the mainstream and helping him get up and running. Not only did she help write this, but she also produced it. John Carpenter wrote the music for this movie, as he does, correct me if I'm wrong, does he do the music in every movie he's made?
For the ones that were under a certain budget, he did most of music. Like the ones he didn't do, I don't think he did some music for, was like the Memoirs of Invisible Man with Chevy Chase when he went studio. And then after that, that's why he took a break and kind of went back. So like for all the smaller productions that he was really involved with, that he would do the music.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely a specific sound that he brings. Like I think about the score in They Live or Big Trouble in Little China.
Well, it was the music from Assault on Precinct 13 that actually, from that film, that got him this role. But that music, Donald Pleasance's daughter liked that movie and that score. So she is the one that persuaded her dad to actually sign on to take that role for this movie after Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee decided to opt out.
Assault on Precinct 13 was actually John Carpenter's second film, correct?
Yeah, it was after Dark Star.
Right. So Dark Star, he had worked on with a guy named Dan O'Bannon, which I came across that guy's name while researching Aliens and the film Alien. And I was interested to see how those tied together.
Dan O'Bannon's got a lot of credits for films and doing stuff behind the scenes and on screen that a lot of people aren't aware of.
It's something I thought was fascinating as well, talking about music, because I kind of went off on a John Carpenter tangent while researching for Halloween, but rewatched The Thing with Kurt Russell. And the music in that, has always been very iconic, to that film. I was surprised to find out that John Carpenter didn't write that.
Was it when he used Ennio Morricone?
Yeah.
Yeah, from the spaghetti westerns, and then Tarantino would use him as well for The Hateful Eight.
Oh, no kidding. Okay.
Yep.
But yeah, a lot of Carpenter's music does seem to slightly have a bit of a Western theme to it, especially with Snake Plissken's theme in Escape from L.A., where he even introduces some harmonica.
Well, John Carpenter, out of all the genres, Western is his favorite, and that's what he's really inspired from, because Assault on Precinct 13, all that pretty much is Night of the Living Dead meets John Wayne's Rio Bravo. Okay. Is having your characters all in one central location being attacked and really isolating them. And that's why it works.
Anything to add, Rob?
No, I don't think Halloween would obviously be what it is without the music and the score, just because...
100%.
There's something about, what is it called, that 5/3 time score that just, even to this day, just puts me on edge.
Yeah.
And that's just something a lot of the other sequels that didn't have him as a composer it couldn't match, especially when they were trying to get to, like, Halloween 6 had, like, some kind of MTV rock score, which was just terrible.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't add anything to it. And that's one reason why one of my favorite, like, modern horror movies is It Follows, because it does something very similar with the music to where it builds the dread and it kind of creates this anxiety, which John Carpenter, I think, did best and introduced.
There's a lot to be said about the fact that this film, Halloween, 78's Halloween, only had a budget of $300,000. John Carpenter basically wrote, directed, and scored for $10,000. And most of the money in this film went towards the cameras. I was really interested to find out about that. And it's one of the first uses of the Steadicam. I think they called it the Panavision Glide or something.
Yep.
Back then. Sorry if I'm stealing any of your thunder, Rick, from research.
No. I mean, Donald Pleasance, he topped out at getting paid the most at $20K.
Okay.
I was about to say Kathy Lee Gifford. Jamie Lee Curtis, she got
totally different movie.
Yeah.
Where Regis Philbin plays the shape.
The night I came home.
I'm trying to tell a story.
I'm gonna kill you. She got paid $8,000, but I mean that movie off the $300,000 brought in $70 million.
Yeah.
So,
well, I wanted to connect the music theme and budget to what Rob was talking about with subsequent sequels having different scores. I feel like the low budget kind of atmosphere makes it more real. And for me, that makes it more edgy. And the use of music was brilliant in this film. I watched, also in preparation for this, I watched the other Halloweens. I watched the Rob Zombie, and then I watched the other remakes. My personal opinion, I didn't like them. In the Rob Zombie film, I was cheering for Michael Myers to kill Laurie because she was so obnoxious.
speaking of the music, Carpenter actually played a cut of it for the producers without the music, and they hated it.
Right.
He put the music in, and it is what it is today. So you can see how important music is to the film. And I know we've discussed this before.
Yeah.
Just like the magic of editing and what music can do.
Oh, think about the movie Jaws with no music. You know, it'd be like a peaceful little romp watching a, undersea adventure. But as soon as you add that music in there, it totally changes.
I think there's something to also be said about the low budgetness of the movie, just because I like the fact that when you don't have the unlimited budget of some big picture films, that you have to kind of make do with what you have. I mean,
Yeah.
his mask is a perfect example of
There you
something
go.
that they just kind of had to create on the fly, because originally they were going to go after a clown mask to kind of, go with his childhood clown costume, but then they found this and just did something makeshift, and it's scarier than anything that, an unlimited budget could have helped create.
I like the fact that it only cost $1.98.
Oh, yeah. It's great use at the time. I mean, very innovative. And also one of the things that I hate about Halloween H2O is the look of the mask. I mean, it looks like they got their theatrics department to make like a pristine recreation of the Halloween mask. Whereas like the subsequent films, the Rob Zombie and then whoever made the other ones that continued on with like Halloween Kills and all that, they went the complete opposite direction and tried to age the mask.
Well, they also used 3 masks in Halloween H2O, and that's why it looks so different throughout the entire movie, which is it's just bad. And the interesting thing is that in a Halloween 2, the original Halloween 2, they actually used the same mask, but since they had a different actor, and I think it sat under Deborah Hill's mattress or under her bed for years, and she was a heavy smoker. I may be confusing some of my people, but it aged the mask. It made it look yellow tinted and stuff like that. So even though the second movie looks different, it's still the same exact mask. It's just been aged with smoke, and also a different actor with a bigger head kind of changed the way the shape looked.
Interesting.
Because if you watch the fourth one, I think it's in the fourth one, either the fourth or fifth, but there's a scene, I think it's at the school.
Yeah, it's the fourth.
Yeah, and you can see, and they never changed it or even went back to try to touch it up. But there is a mask that has like
With
pretty much
blonde hair.
like blondish hair.
Mm-hmm.
Is that just someone not paying attention or what?
I actually talked to the actor that played Michael in that movie, and I think he had told me that it's because of the lighting kind of lit up the mask so much to where it affected the way it looked. I could be misremembering, but that's what I recall him saying.
What would you talk to him about, Rob? If you had a question for the original shape, what kind of
Are we talking
questions
about
would you
Nick
pose?
Castle?
Yeah, Nick Castle.
Okay. I don't know if I'd ask him any questions, because it's like, what could I ask that he hadn't already been asked? You know what I
Right.
mean?
That's
I don't know
the
if I'm
basic
coming
problem,
at it
especially with
from-
these longer movies or movies that came out so long ago and have such a huge fan base.
Yeah.
Well, you could always talk to him about, he did direct Last Starfighter, and
Oh.
he co-wrote Escape from New York.
Ooh. Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. I can work with that. But just like, tell me about the shape. What was your motivation for walking?
Yeah.
Nah.
Because again, they were trying to create this movie, very low budget, and they knew horror was the way to come at it. I mean, a lot of subsequent directors like James Cameron also kind of did their own, like The Terminator is basically Halloween, but with guys shooting guns instead of, using knives and whatnot. So it's just like Halloween is the perfect place for both actors and directors to get their start, because there is such a massive return on investment.
It was interesting. I was watching another interview, like a 1978 interview that a British person had done with John Carpenter and Donald Pleasance on the set of Halloween. John Carpenter actually made mention that he didn't really care for the work of his contemporaries, George Lucas, Steven Spielberg. Said that, yeah, Jaws was all right, made some money, but he didn't like Close Encounters. He felt like it was all over the place and that a director should direct and control what's going on. And he felt that Close Encounters was kind of all over the place.
John Carpenter, even in the 70s when he was coming into his own, he was a very old school film, lover. So his inspirations were like John Ford and Howard Hawks and the way they would do their films. So that's what he was ingrained with, and he kind of ran with it. And even up until recently, you can tell that he kind of, when he's not making a film, he would kind of just stay out of the spotlight because he's not like the rest of them there. He does the job and he wants to move on, and he doesn't like the business side of it. That's why he is, I guess they kind of make him out to be like a cantankerous old man now.
Yeah.
But you do that for 40 years is just trying to get the stuff that you're writing onto the screen. Yeah, it's going to make you sour having to deal with the business side of it. If you look at Jaws and you look at Star Wars, they are the blockbuster movies that we know now for like the summer blockbusters.
Right.
They're the ones that really, where they got, oh, wow, we can make some money off of this and tie in merchandising and do this. And he was aware of that. And he wanted to just, I just want to talk about the film. I don't want to do all the other crap that goes along with it.
That was something else I found interesting when he was describing his disdain for trying to have a theme or underlying message. He said that's not his business. He's there to entertain. He wants to be able to give the audience basically a ride of emotions without having to make them think, or, it's sort of tied into some of the things that I've watched today where they're discussing some of the downfall in Marvel films or anything related to Disney. Is just the conscious decision to insert themes or messages. And you also see it at any sort of award show where you see the actor or production people or anybody going up to receive their award has some sort of thing to say about anything outside of movie making. I don't enjoy that part of it. And this is where I get on board with what John Carpenter was saying. I want to be entertained. I don't want to hear a political speech or rally.
Yeah, but he definitely put messages in his movies, though. I mean, They Live is a huge synopsis of his feelings about capitalism, I would say, and everything like that.
That's a great counterpoint to that.
Yeah. And as he's gotten older, and you look at some interviews, he does go back and address, he does bring up the phallic imagery that is seen in Halloween with the knife and with Laurie. And the whole sexual thing, I guess that where he's gotten older, he is explaining a little bit more. He is saying that there is some credence to some of the stuff that's in the movie that people are always trying to dive or trying to tear apart. Because when you're writing something, you don't really think about it. And then when you review something that you've done, you're like, well, maybe I put that in there because at that time, this is what I was thinking or this is what I was going through. So I think with time, especially as 1978, he's had more time to digest it, and Halloween's been out there, especially when they started franchising. Now you see Michael Myers on everything. It's in memes, it's in GIFs, everything. Is that I think he's got time to really let it marinate and see what is this that I created, and maybe there is, some truth to what I put in there, and I didn't even know it at the time.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, everybody has the ability to evolve and change their opinions, and you see a lot of celebrities who get in trouble for something they said many years ago, and it resurfaces.
And because he does have a strong musical background, I mean, and he's still into music, and he was in that band with the other production crews throughout the 80s, and he still has CDs, and he releases his own John Carpenter scores on stuff that he's working on. I think with the musical background, and you see this as a lot of people write what they know or what they're going through at the time or things that they're thinking about. So looking at that, I could see where that would happen because he's very musical. So in his movies, you can kind of see that rhythm as well.
Can I go back to when reading into things that we were talking about earlier? Just because, since this is 1978. This is kind of like the first slasher since like Psycho, because Texas Chainsaw is kind of more of like a grindhouse type movie. I wouldn't put it in the same genre.
What year was Chainsaw?
Wasn't that 74?
Oh wow, yeah, that's a bit of a gap.
The same year that Black Christmas came out.
So were there no real horror movies between Chainsaw and Halloween?
There are horror movies, just not like this.
Okay, so go ahead, Rob.
We've all seen Scream, and they talk about the rules. You know, Wes Craven talks about the rules in those movies. And 1978 Halloween kind of sets that up, where people start emulating Halloween and start saying, like, all right, well, these two promiscuous women at the time, you know, who were having relations and then got brutally murdered afterward, and then Laurie's the only one that doesn't. She doesn't. So then all the movies afterwards start kind of emulating that, and then started creating these rules. So people started saying, like, well, the killers kill those who have sex, and those that don't are the final girls, and they get to live on. But that wasn't ever his intention. But going back to your kind of original thinking of the podcast, you know, 40's on the 80's, you know, this is what sets up the rules for all the slashers and all the things that copycat this throughout the entire 80's. You know, from Jason to Freddy to all the little ones here and there in between that.
What year did Halloween 2 come out?
Was that
81.
82? 81?
Okay, so this sets, like, yeah, I think that it really does set up sort of the program or programming, the formula, if you will, for everything to follow, including a slew of copycats. Now, would you say that Jason Voorhees is a direct copycat or response to Michael Myers?
I would say Friday the 13th is, not Jason so much.
Yeah,
right.
Chris Cunningham even admitted, the producer who worked with Wes Craven on Last House on the Left, and was also the producer of House that we like so much, right? As a producer, not a filmmaker, he saw that, yeah, I can make money off of this. It'd be cheap, which, I mean, that's why a lot of filmmakers get into horror if they're trying to get a break or trying to make quick cash, because you can film it on the cheap, and there's always a market for horror, even when it's bad, because you've got rabid fan base that it doesn't matter if it's garbage or not, they'll get it. I was in a film class where they broke it down on the film side that if the studios released a slasher film, even if it was crap, every Friday night, and they could actually recoup all the money that they lost on the rest of the year on other productions.
Date night kind of thing, huh?
Yeah, horror could make the studio float, even if it's garbage, for their other productions.
I was thinking about this yesterday. It's been a while since I've actually wanted to really go to the theater or was excited to go to the theater to see a movie. It just feels like it's fallen flat. I don't know where the marketing is. I don't know where the enthusiasm or the stories are, but it feels like they're sort of independent films. At least that's how it feels to me, whether or not the big studios are involved or not. But it just feels like the film industry in general has fallen flat to me.
The last movie I went to see was last year when they re-released the original Dracula and Frankenstein and played them right before Halloween. Me and one of my sons went to that.
Well, what about a new film?
Other than that, like there's nothing. The only thing new that would excite me to go see would probably be like the last Tarantino flick, because I would want to see that in a theater because this is going to be his last one.
But the last one I saw was actually on Thanksgiving Day, and I saw the movie Thanksgiving by Eli Roth.
How was that?
I loved it. It was an absolute blast. It was it's a slasher film, but it got back to kind of being slightly campy and just fun again.
Now, didn't you say that you also saw Terrifier 2 in the theater?
I did. I did see that. I saw that at Universal Studios 2 years ago, and that one was just interesting to see that much gore and blood and ultraviolence in a theater with surrounded by other people.
Yeah. I saw a documentary where they were discussing about how horror film directors, actors are some of the nicest people you will ever come across, possibly because they're able to release some of those inner demons through the making of their craft. Where, let's say, somebody who maybe Walt Disney had a really dark side that we just never really knew about.
And yeah, especially Wes Craven, because Wes Craven, he talked about it because he was a very educated guy, and he talked about how that the reason why people have that notion that they're the film directors or the writers are like just crazy people. He's like, it's a form of catharsis where you're working through those emotions of, the human experience so you can release them and get them out. He's like, it's the people who repress it or the people who are trying to say, you have this feeling, you can't get it out, that are the ones that usually have some deep, darker issues going on. He said, so like us, he's like, because we get to express that, he's like, we're actually somewhat healthier and we're more, stable and we're more calm because we're not holding that in.
Yeah.
There's also the fans that enjoy these movies as well, because some people like to think like, all right, well, if you like these type of movies, what's wrong with you? And I believe the psychology of it goes into people that had a lot of fear growing up or childhood, that they enjoyed the horror movies just because it was able for them to control the fear, so that way you can get it in kind of like microdoses, so that way you can kind of confront fear itself. And I go back to like, why was I obsessed with horror movies as a kid? And I think that's partly why, just because of all the anxiety and fear that surrounded me to a degree. So I think that's one reason why I became obsessed with it from an early age.
Well, I would also like to add in there, just like I hear younger generations today hear a song, and then when they come to find out that, no, Paul McCartney wrote that originally, they're like, who's Paul McCartney? I thought Kanye West wrote that. I feel like Halloween has grown to the level where younger people today are probably familiar with the newer releases, might not have gone back and looked at the originals yet.
Well, even Halloween is, if you look throughout it, because he was such a fan of Alfred Hitchcock, it's very much an homage to Psycho as well. I mean, so much so that Jamie Lee Curtis is in it. Her mother was in the original.
Vivian Lee.
Even Loomis, I believe, is also a name from the original Psycho, and I think there's a lot of
Sam
other
Loomis.
little things in there as well. So it's just like we're talking about Halloween as if it was like the original, but I mean, he's still pulled from the people he had watched before him.
This is all really good stuff, guys. Should we get into talking about Act 1 at all, or do you still have some more?
One last thing with Jamie Lee Curtis, because they were looking at other actresses, and John Carpenter didn't put two and two together and realize that Jamie Lee Curtis was, Janet Leigh's daughter.
Janet Leigh. Why did I say Vivian Lee? Who's Vivian Lee?
She's a different actress.
Was she from Gone with the Wind?
And it's spelled with, Gone with the Wind. Hers is Leigh, not Lee.
Gotcha.
But they saw, well, hey, this would be good for marketing. So on that side, he's like, yeah, we could get our name out there, and then we have all these other tie-ins. So it worked out perfect.
And it was Janet Leigh. And she was also in The Fog, wasn't she?
Janet Leigh?
Yeah, she was. I'm almost positive. Vivian Lee is in it, and so is Janet Leigh.
Yep, and Jamie.
Did I say Vivian again? Jamie Lee and Janet Leigh. Holy smokes!
Man, you got a thing for Vivian.
At least I didn't say Bruce Lee.
No, that's a different movie.
Yeah, Bruce Lee in The Fog.
I would like to see Bruce Lee in Halloween. That'd be interesting in the showdown.
I've always wondered when it comes to killers like Jason Voorhees or Michael Myers, if the government was able to capture these dudes and say airdrop them into Kandahar during the Iraq War or something. It's like, all right, go ahead and deploy Operation Michael Myers. Ahead of the Marines? Yeah, just let him do his thing. What's he need? Just give him a mask, some rope, and maybe some dog food or something so he doesn't have to eat the local dogs. Who knows? We have Act 1 to discuss and all the things that occur within Act 1.
They filmed the entire shoot in 20 days. So
the entire film was 20 days?
Yeah.
Holy smokes. But yeah, the documentary I saw.
Summer as well.
Right. In California.
Yeah, which is why they had trouble finding pumpkins and stuff like that, which is why you basically don't see any throughout the movie, or leaves or anything like that, just because it was in the middle of the summer. You couldn't find a pumpkin, you couldn't find leaves, so they had to keep reusing the leaves, and I think they painted some turnips or something like that too.
Because they couldn't find pumpkins, it was like some sort of Argentinian fruit, or I forget exactly what it was. I was watching a documentary yesterday on it, and it was like a green thing that they just spray painted orange. But I think they said that they only had 3 pumpkins total for the film. And one of them got destroyed by Tommy, that little... Anyways.
Oh, that was because of the bullies.
Yeah, well, I guess you could say, darn those bullies.
Yeah.
The boogeyman's coming.
Shut up.
No. The leaves, quick note, they did have 2 leaf wranglers on set that would have to get the leaves and put them when Michael's hiding behind the bush when they're walking back from school.
Yeah.
Is that the leaves that kept popping up on scene, one of the people that were putting the leaves down and would have to pick them up from shot to shot was Robert Englund.
Oh.
I hadn't heard that.
I did hear that scene, though, where it's like he's by the bush, you can see cigarette smoke go across the camera.
That's John Carpenter chain smoking.
All right, cut.
That's enough of that shit.
A little bit of atmosphere. How about that? Some boogeyman smoke.
They didn't have enough money in the budget for a fog machine, so
I think I've done that before, like with video cam back in the day. But anyways, so yeah, from my understanding, they did over 20 takes for this initial scene of where they're going through the house with the Steadicam, and because it was one single shot, they only had about 4 minutes worth of film, so they were trying to figure out how can we get all the way through the house here in 4 minutes. Couldn't be done. So they had to find a cut point. And I thought that was pretty ingenious and interesting how they used the cut point of the mask being put up onto the face of the character as the cut point to begin the second reel.
And the hands for that portion were actually done by Deborah Hill.
Yeah. So again, I mean, I don't know. The more I started to learn about her, I started to almost feel like this was sort of like another version of Brad Pitt and Jennifer Aniston, where Deborah Hill was kind of the Jennifer Aniston character, where you almost felt a little bad for her, you know.
Well, they were dating at the time, but even after they broke up and that relationship didn't work, they still were friends and worked together on other projects.
Yeah, they did. But John Carpenter and Deborah were in England together visiting Stonehenge when they came up with the idea for the fog. And Deborah Hill got to work on the story and wrote the character that was played by Barbeau. Was it Adrienne Barbeau?
Adrienne Barbeau, yes.
So I'm guessing it was during the filming of The Fog that John Carpenter started a romance with her, because supposedly Jamie Lee Curtis made a comment that it was like a really uncomfortable set because of that and felt bad for Deborah.
Oh, well, that's a shame.
Yeah, exactly.
On a good note, Dan's in England right now. If we ever want to cover The Fog, we can go send him into Stonehenge to get us some photos.
That's one of those deals where because he was born and raised there, he's probably never been to Stonehenge. It's one of those things where us as tourists would be like, oh, we got to go to Stonehenge. It's just some rocks out in the country.
And then we have to have him put a car and knock it over like in European Vacation and film that too.
You actually can't drive anywhere close enough to get to that. It's like
we had all some people blocked.
Yeah.
And that also ties back into Halloween 3.
Oh, The Witch. The Witch.
Season of the Witch. But what they put in those masks was little pieces of Stonehenge that were stolen, and that's what controlled them and turned them into bugs coming out of the masks.
I really wanted to go off in a tangent of Monty Python, the Holy Grail, in determining how you can find out if someone is a witch.
Oh, yeah.
Would either one of you be able to go along with that one? Or are you not Holy Grail fans?
Holy Grail fan, but why don't we save that for part 3 if we cover part 3?
Halloween 3?
Yeah.
It's 80s.
1983.
What's the guy's name? Scott? Tom Scott? No, Tom. Who's the lead actor in Halloween 3? Tom. What is it?
Oh, what? Oh, Tom Atkins?
Tom Atkins. There we go. Yeah. Tying to Lead the Weapon.
I love Tom Atkins.
Yeah. We've discussed that. It's kind of.
And he's in Creepshow, which had Adrienne Barbeau.
Yeah.
And that's another one we have access to, Red.
Who? Adrienne Barbeau?
Yeah, I met her in October. She was here for a Creepshow. I
thought you were going to say a cream show.
I almost said that for some reason.
That's a different podcast.
Ooh.
Yeah. Adrienne Barbeau.
I would listen to that episode. Now, she was actually Rodney Dangerfield's wife in Back to School.
Yep.
I love that movie. It's a great one. early Robert Downer Jr. But see, this is one of those monkey holes we're going down.
Yeah. And she was in Escape from New York.
That's right. Brain Squeeze. What the heck was her name? Anyways. There really was. I mean, what's the motivation? Has that ever been discussed, or is just Michael just a little psycho? I know the Rob Zombie version tried to create some backstory as to why Michael did what he did. I don't know.
Let's just look at it like there's no sequels. You could either take it one of two ways. I like the premise that the kid's just evil.
Right.
And just leave it like that. Because it makes it creepier. Or you can go with the whole absentee kind of, guardianship. Because she's supposed to be babysitting him, but she's not. She's playing with her boyfriend, who, if you look at the running time, is like less than a 2-punch jump because he goes upstairs and just leaves that quick.
Yep.
Well, yeah, you also have to, how long does it take to get undressed and dressed again?
Yeah.
So he really diminishes himself.
Especially at that age, you would think that he would go a little longer.
Or at least recover faster.
Yeah, exactly. But no, he leaves, and then the knife you could tie into maybe there is phallic in it, and it's Michael doing it because of that.
Felt bad that his sister was cheated for such a short duration, and so he's gonna do it right.
Or that he's exposed to, even though he's not visually seeing what's going on, he is aware of what is going on. And, his parents aren't there, and you constantly see that there's like no adult supervision.
You were going to say something, Rob?
Oh, I was just going to say, do we think that it was intentional just to make Michael evil from the beginning, or is that something that they were doing for the shock value of it, especially since they had the ability to kind of give a first-person perspective? Because was that done before Halloween?
It was done in Black Christmas, which came out, 5 years before or 4 years before, which, I don't know, Red, have you seen Black Christmas?
I'm aware of it, but never watched it.
I haven't seen it either.
It's a Canadian horror film that has like Margot Kidder. It's got a couple people in there that before they got big, but it was made by Bob Clark, who would go on to do Christmas Story like 10 years later. So it's kind of funny that he has a really good horror movie and then that one. But John Carpenter even said that, he was inspired by that. And they did do POV from the killer's point of view in that. You've got Jaws, who's the shark POV. And then the really first POV that you see in a horror movie was back in like 32 for Vampire. And Vampire actually had a shot where it was POV. And so that's like the first time it really stands out with the POV. But I think Halloween just, they nailed it. And that's why you see it used so much even now to this day.
And we all know it's Michael, but I can't imagine being in movie theaters in 1978, watching this, not knowing what you're going to be seeing. And then, they unmask the killer and it's
a child.
Do you know it's Michael before? Because she says, oh, Michael, when she's like getting stabbed, but do we know it's actually a child doing it until he's unmasked?
No, you kind of get the inclination it's a smaller hand when it reaches for the mask, but you're not really aware that it's this nice looking blonde child, which looks harmless and almost sad when they do the mask reveal, right?
Yeah.
So I think that part of it is meant to be a little bit of shocking, almost like, here's a serial killer, looks like the person next door. Oh, scary, because it's the person next door. And here's this nice looking child who's a murderer. So meant to unnerve, absolutely.
Well, this is also the first horror movie that kind of brings horror to the suburbs and everything, like when you look at back the Universal Monsters, you'd have to go to a castle or something like that.
Right.
And, or you'd have to go to some kind of dilapidated mansion in Texas in the middle of a field, while this one's like, no, this could be right next door.
Right. Yeah, and they get deeper into that as they explore Haddonfield later, 15 years later, right? It's like it's your neighborhood.
Yeah, I agree with Rob, especially on how, when we were jokingly talking about how it was tied to JFK. If you look at it from then, those 15 years, you have JFK, you've got all the assassinations of leaders, You've got Watergate, you've got Vietnam, you've got all the crap that's on the news, you've got white flight, you've got people moving to the suburbs. There's a lot of social dynamics going on. And people, I think, that moved to the suburbs where, yeah, they could see the horrors of what was going on around the world in the U.S. on the news, but they were still, there was that boundary where they felt safe that, oh, this would never happen in our neighborhood. But the fact that in the opening shot, early, a little boy who, looks like a good kid is the killer, and it's happening in a, upscale white neighborhood.
So tie that into Jaws. It'd be like if Chief Brody's standing on the beach feeling safe, all of a sudden Jaws comes up out of the water and he's got legs.
Yeah.
It's like, you're not safe anymore, Chief.
Because if you look at the horror movies of the 70s, earlier 70s and late 60s, it was usually like, especially Texas Chainsaw, that is a fairy tale of, when you leave your home and you go out into the woods, it's very much a grim fairy tale.
Yeah.
Except for Halloween, you don't have to go anywhere. The evil, the horror of the world are coming to you.
And the whole babysitter aspect of it, too, I think was meant to also make it relatable, as so many young people have either been a babysitter or have been babysat. And that ties into another film favorite of mine, at least the opening part of it, When a Stranger Calls. Are you guys familiar with that one?
Yeah, with Carol Kane.
Right. So the opening sequence of that one, right? Isn't she a babysitter?
Yeah, she's babysitting, and that whole opening premise, I mean, that was great. Unfortunately, like the rest of the movie kind of falters after that, but that whole sequence is solid. It is terrifying.
Right. It's relatable. Again, you're in your house by yourself, and the thought that it's revealed that what is dangerous is already in the house with you. Extremely frightening. All right, where are we in Act 1? Michael's been revealed.
Have we talked about it? Yeah. We keep getting off track.
Oh, no. It's like we started talking about the rabbit holes, but because Dylan, he actually created an art piece, sort of like the, what would you call it, like the logo for 40's on the 80's. It sort of gave him the idea of the three monkeys, hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil, and described what we're doing, reviewing movies, and he came up with the image of three monkeys sitting in a movie theater in various states of hear no evil, see no evil. But based off of that, I started kind of making a joke, instead of going down rabbit holes, we're going down monkey holes. To which
still sounds
like a dessert of some sort.
Oh, it sounds delicious.
I think it sounds extremely dirty.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyways. All right.
So we have Michael being unmasked.
He's unmasked, and essentially 15 years later, this is where we get a little bit more backstory, right? Where Dr. Loomis and the nurse are driving at night and headed towards the asylum. Now, what were they trying to do? Were they trying to transfer him?
I think that they were trying to make sure he gets transferred.
Yeah, I think they were going up there to make sure that the transfer went off without a hitch. And, of course, we know that didn't go well even before they got there.
I don't know how many lunatic asylum transfers take place in the middle of the night, though. That seems like something would be better served during the middle of the day.
They probably do it. They're at a hospital, so they could sedate them at any time. But unless they are strict on their schedule, and maybe they want to do it at night, so there's less commotion.
We've got to make this move now.
I mean,
it's the day before Halloween. Maybe the people had plans, Halloween parties they had to get to, so they're like, let's make this happen. Now, the escape didn't happen Halloween night. It was like a day or two before Halloween, right?
Yeah, because he had to drive all that distance.
Right, and he learned how to drive because of classes offered inside of the insane asylum.
That's what we think, but if you listen to Dr. Loomis when he's ranting about that, he's not a very good role model either, because he's parking in a handicapped spot at that hospital, and he doesn't have handicap tags.
Well, he is a little bit off, as we know that, but he's also very self-important, I think. I think we get a good sense of that just from some of his interactions with other people, and maybe a little bit grandiose because he feels like he's been working with pure evil and the devil. Maybe he feels that puts him on par or the side of the angels somehow. were you going to say, Rob?
I was just going to say, I do like the explanation of how they explain his driving ability, because they're like, even the people in the movie were questioning it. It's just like, well, he did a very good job of it last night. So
right.
It's like, they didn't have an explanation for it, but I just liked that answer to it.
Yeah, they pointed out something that other people would question, so that was great. But yeah, I would like to point out that there's probably a general overall failure by the police department, because supposedly there were roadblocks set up that Michael was able to evade. He is driving an easily recognizable vehicle, probably doesn't know the rules of the road. Even if he knows how to drive, he probably doesn't know how to drive the speed limit, or to use his blinker, or to come to a complete stop at stop signs. Should have been another way for the police to find this dude.
But he does stop at lights and stop signs, because we see that he is, at the hardware store.
Yeah, little Easter eggs. It took me a while to realize that was actually happening in the background, which was kind of cool.
And he's looking both ways before he goes, too, which makes it even funnier. So he's very safety conscious when he's driving that boat.
And he's wearing a mask while he's driving, right?
Yeah, the entire time.
Not easy. Not an easy thing to do.
I mean, the timeline right there also kind of gets a little messed up, because it's just like, if Michael had already broken into that, stolen, I can't remember if they said rope and a few other things, but the mask is obviously stolen.
Rope,
there.
knife,
like,
and a mask.
How long has that alarm been going off, and how come they're just now getting it? Because he's been driving around and being seen with his mask for a while.
Right. He was seen at the school, or parked outside looking at Lori, and then when they're after school walking home, he's in front of them behind the bush. And then later on,
Dad's a terrible cop. If they were just smoking a joint and she rolls up and he doesn't smell shit.
Pulls right up and rolls the window down right, and he sticks his head straight in the window.
Yeah, worst cop ever.
Yeah. Yeah. But Michael is also poster boy for Laundry Fresh. Enjoys a fresh laundry sensation, and can stand in laundry for hours, just experiencing the aroma.
I was just like, what are you getting at?
Going down that monkey hole, baby. All right. He escapes, smashes the window, and that was one of those things that was pretty interesting, too, seeing how they had to come up with how to smash the window with the palm of your hand by using some flesh-colored tape to tape a wrench to your wrist. Gets in the car, drives away, and we're basically off and running. Loomis is hot on his trail. We get introduced to Lori. This is her first screen role, isn't it? I don't think she had done anything prior to this.
She did smaller bits, but...
Well, she did an interview where she had mentioned that after this film, she had trouble getting other roles.
Yeah, because she went on to do, like, Prom Night.
Terror Train?
Terror Train, yep.
Was Terror Train the one with David Copperfield?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, that was a weird movie.
Well, she was only 20 when this movie came out, so, I mean, she was still very, very young.
She even says that in real life at that time, she was more like the supporting characters, like the cheerleaders and stuff like that. She was working against what she really was, because she was not like Lori at all at that time.
I'm glad you brought up the other girls, because both of them have been in other things as well. And the one girl, I can't even think of their names right now, so I'm horrible.
PJ Souls?
No idea. Yeah. The one,
PJ Souls is
the blonder one was in Carrie.
Yep. And Rock and Roll High School.
Yep, yeah. The Ramones.
Never saw that one, but I have seen Carrie. All right, so we're introduced to all these people. Lori's dad is a real estate agent, apparently, trying to sell this house, which looks like complete shit. I mean, rain gutters hanging off the front.
So he's not a very good agent.
Yeah, just from the view of that house later in the film, I mean, nothing has been done with this place, it looks like, in 15 years.
I mean, I think we all know that house in the neighborhood that's just like, all right, this thing's not going to sell, or you always see it. So it's just like most cities or towns have that house that there's a story or, a ghost story to tell around it. So I think that's a smart move on his part to kind of do that.
All right, so we're into Act 2 because we talked about Lori dropping that key off. But yeah, again, just the use of low-budget filming angles, lighting, natural environments, and then the music. Without that little bit of background score, a little bit of piano, I feel like that just really develops this world and kind of creates a tension that wouldn't be there without it. And I think that's where some of the subsequent films really fail. I know we said we're not going to talk about the other films, but
There is a simplicity to this one. I mean, especially just because it was a classic piano, but by Halloween 2, classic piano was considered like passe, so they went to like, straight up synth. So it's just like when something's like 10 years old, you're kind of trying to be significantly different than that and trying to be like, well, we have to stay with times. He may have introduced all these elements, but then, he had to keep up with, or, the subsequent Halloweens had to keep up with the times because Freddy and Jason were getting ahead in the movie count area.
yeah.
But anything that's like 10, 15 years old almost feels extremely dated, more so than something that's 30 or 40 years old these days.
So in terms of the action in Act 2, I mean, this kind of gives rise to the rules of surviving a horror film that you guys have already mentioned, where, you don't want to do drugs, you don't want to have sex, you want to be the good girl, and that puts you in the running for being the lone survivor. Based off of what Jamie Lee Curtis said, in actuality, she was closer to how the other girls were than how her character of Laurie was, which is interesting.
I mean, especially growing up the way she did, because, she was her parents were Hollywood royalty, so it would make sense that she was probably more like those, with Tony Curtis and Janet Leigh being her parents. I can't imagine being that household.
Right. Well, shit, there's a couple of things that happen that sort of developing the character of Michael Myers. He steals the headstone
Of Judith Myers.
Right. So how he knew where that was and how much effort did it take to get that out of the ground? I can't imagine how much a headstone would weigh. But I guess he's just lugging that around in a station wagon.
I mean, these are the little things that kind of develop in the subsequent movies, like his super strength,
Right.
like little things like that. Like they probably didn't have any idea of
Yeah.
why or how he did it, but they were just like, wouldn't it be awesome to showcase the corpse in the bed with Judith's name over it, just showing his obsession with his first kill.
Right.
And then also him, I know this is later, but him choking Bob and stuff like that one-handed.
Right.
Just, it kind of develops like, all right, is he superhuman? Is he more than just a man?
More than just a psycho. But
in Act 2, you're saying, trying to focus on like the development of Michael. I think one of the most iconic scenes that several other movies have tried to recreate is Laurie just in the classroom and then the killer's outside watching her.
Yeah. All right. So nightfall, Michael's got his mask and his rope. So Loomis shows up. Does he go? He goes directly to the police station, doesn't he?
Doesn't he just find the sheriff on the side of the road?
I think he finds. Well, that's
he goes to the hardware store first.
He's making
the alarm's going off.
He's making a call from the middle of nowhere where there's a sign that says something like 73 miles, Haddonfield. Mm-hmm. And it happens to be right next to where Michael dumped a car and a body.
And that's where Michael gets the coveralls.
He killed the mechanic.
Right. And so who was Loomis talking to at that point? Was he talking to the police?
That or maybe somebody higher up in Smith's Grove or something like that. I can't remember.
Yeah. Doesn't matter. In any case.
I just can't see Haddonfield being such a big town that would have worn its own sign so far out.
That specific. It's like, I can't wait to get to Haddonfield. 73 miles.
Well, it's supposed to be in Illinois, and in Illinois, there's there's Springfield, Illinois, East St. Louis, and Chicago. So it makes sense if this was a moderately sized area that they would have a sign that far out because there's nothing in between these two.
All right. So in any case, he links up with the police and is trying to basically sell them on the notion. Well, I don't think he's trying to sell them on the fact that he's evil so much as, hey, you got an escaped lunatic who's probably coming home. Because nobody really puts too much thought or effort into it at this point. The minor break-in at the store with a knife and some masks, probably some kids. Again, Laurie is like the only one who's really creeped out, and Loomis is just sort of almost seems to be enjoying himself at one point, just sort of out and about on the town and scaring the little kids who try to get close to the Myers house. And, he does a little voice. And, hey, Dunny, get your little ass away from there. I mean, who really raises the alarm?
I mean, it kind of makes sense, though, doesn't it? I mean, it's been 15 years. He only had a single kill, and it was his family member, so people just kind of wrote it off. And
right. Not a big deal.
Talking about their boogeyman stories, they didn't really think about Michael Myers. It's not until this night that he creates the legend.
Right. So it's like the initial kills. What was the first one? The girl in the garage in the car. Is she the first one to go?
On screen, yes, but
Yeah.
off screen it would have been the mechanic. After,
Well, yeah, true. I'm thinking about the events of the night in that neighborhood. So the friends start dropping like flies. Nobody really knows anything yet. The girl thinks that her boyfriend dresses up like a ghost. He kills her. Now he kills the boyfriend. He kills the boyfriend right before that, doesn't she? Or doesn't he?
Yes. He kills Bob when he's going downstairs to get a sandwich and a beer for PJ Soul's character.
Okay, so that happens downstairs and she's upstairs?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, she's waiting in bed.
That makes a bit more sense. I, for some reason, thought they were on the same level. How did she not hear what was going on? But in any case...
This also kind of brings, because you're talking about character development, and you just start seeing that Michael still has kind of like the thinking of a child. I know I've heard this before, but Jordan Peele likes to think of Michael as kind of like a cat that plays with his dead. And,
Yeah.
If you think of like how a cat acts and how Michael acts are kind of similar in that aspect, especially when, he pins Bob against the wall, turns his head as if, he's a predator and looking at his prey. And then he goes up and he puts on a different costume just for fun.
Right. I don't think we see him do that in any of the other films, do we?
You do. You see in Halloween 5, he put on like a goon mask and he's driving around with the character. But outside of that, he's really just has his Michael Myers mask that he somehow gets replenished every movie.
Yeah, because at any point he could just take the mask off and smoke a cigarette, and the cops would just drive right by.
Except for he has a blind eye.
Well, that was one of the things I saw was explored briefly, where despite the one guy playing the role of the Shape through most of the movie, he was not the one who was the actor when they gave the reveal of the mask coming off. It was a different actor.
Yep.
It's Tony Moran.
Yeah, and that supposedly the eye injury was suggested that it could have occurred when Jamie Lee Curtis stabbed him with the coat hanger.
Yep.
Suggested, anyways.
Which they used again in Halloween 2018. That's why he had the blind eye from that battle.
Okay. So the killings are occurring, and none of the friends are the wiser yet. I think the little boy, Tommy, is looking out. They're playing hide and seek in the house, right? And looking out the window. Oh, we also have to mention the fact that they're watching The Thing, the original, on TV, right? And it's like they actually show quite a bit of the movie in the film.
Showing his obsession with the movie, and they kind of do something similar in Halloween 3, where they're watching a movie, but it happens to be Halloween 1.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, I missed that piece. Good catch.
Yeah, because, besides him remaking The Thing, he actually loves that movie.
Yeah.
So that's why he wanted to put it in there. And then there's also, you can hear in the background stuff like Forbidden Planet.
A funny thing just occurred to me that I watched that original black and white version of The Thing with our German family when I was a kid, when we were at the guest house. Rob, I don't know if I ever told you about this one.
Mm-mm.
Never would have come up in conversation. It was down in the kitchen. But in German, besides dubbing the voice, they also dubbed the title. And the title of The Thing in German was Das Ding. It's as much as I remember from that, but it just always stuck with me. Das Ding. But little Tommy looks out the window and sees the Shape carrying a body, and the boogeyman, freaking out. But I think that's the first kind of alarm that you get from anybody about Michael Myers. Is Tommy doing that thing? And is it Laurie that goes across the street to check on her friends? And
Yeah.
This is
Eventually,
she discovers like the dead bodies, like behind cabinets or in closets or something, and then the one guy comes somehow set up to come slinging down from the ceiling.
From the rope that he's stolen from the hardware store.
Oh, he's putting the rope to good use, is he?
Yeah. He's using his tools.
And then after that, she splits and runs across the street. I don't know.
Well, that whole scene, like the second, like from her going over there, it's like a roller coaster ride of dread. Like it's nonstop. It's just he keeps getting knocked down. She gets knocked down too. Like when she first discovers him, and then he misses and stabs her, and she falls over the stairs.
So lots of falling.
Yep, that gets set up in this movie, and then obviously they use it a lot in every other horror movie after that.
Well, I was also going to make mention of the technique of the victim running crazily away, falling and bumping into things, while the killer basically walks and stalks. Now, I don't know if that particular technique has happened in any film prior to this. I mean, is that the first time that we're seeing that?
Leatherface ran because he was chasing her down the driveway when she's trying to get away. In regards to the killers, yeah. I mean, we really didn't have any American slashers, and it wasn't defined like it is now. So those tropes weren't really in place. But, I mean, that's what kind of came the running joke with the movies as well as they went on, is that it didn't matter where you went to. They're still going to walk and find you.
Right.
They're still going to get you. No matter how fast you run, he walks faster.
So the classic tale of the rabbit and the hare in a slasher film. Act 2 is picking up speed. Michael is strolling across the way. So now it's time for the...
Wouldn't we say that's Act 3 now?
Right. He's strolling across the road. As soon as he comes into the house, it's like it's time for the final showdown with him and Laurie. And where's Loomis at this point? Is he still hanging out at the other house?
He's still watching the front of Myers' house, isn't he?
Yeah, I think so.
Remember, he saw the car. So
Right.
then he's walking down the street trying to see, and then that's when he sees, when she sends the kids to run down to the Mackenzie's house, that's when he knows, all right, that's where Michael's at.
I mean, it's walking distance, of course, but as the comedian Stephen Wright says, anything's in walking distance if you have enough time. But how close is the Myers house to where all of this action is taking place on Halloween night?
It has to be like right around the corner.
Because, I mean, he has her drop the key off on the way to school. Loomis is hanging out, and he knows there's some shit going on down the road, right? And that's why he comes over?
Because the kids are out running when she says to go. But this is after, because they were hiding. Where were the kids hiding in the house initially?
Shit, I don't know.
I can't remember.
After... Yeah, she had him. I think she had him in the one bedroom.
She had him go next door. She had him leave the house and go next door, didn't she?
But that was afterwards, because that's after Michael's like attacking her in the closet, right? And then she stabs him, and then she thinks he's dead, and then she tells the kids to run off.
Ah.
Yeah, she go down to Mackenzie's, and the kids come running out of the house screaming, and that's when Loomis sees the kids. But he's walking down the street because he saw the car.
So he's got to be close.
Alerted.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's just surveying, all right, where could he be at? And when the kids come running out, that's when he knows where he's at.
Well, since this was such a low budget shoot, I would imagine that these houses are probably almost right across the street from each other.
They were. They have since moved the original Myers house like much further away, but you can travel to a lot of these houses in the same neighborhood.
Okay.
Yeah, the house got relocated over the years, and they use it for I think it was like a dentist office at one time, but they have businesses like running out of it. But this was all filmed in and around Pasadena.
Okay. So the kids are off to the Mackenzie's house, and Laurie, why is she hanging around?
Because she was attacked, so I mean she's probably going through some kind of shock, and she's saying to go get them, but as they're running outside, Michael is basically sitting up, so they have to be extremely close, because that's when she starts getting attacked by Michael, and then Loomis comes in and shoots him.
Well, I do want to call out that one technique where your eye is sort of drawn one way while the action occurs somewhere else, and that's something that has come up in several of the documentaries I've watched in the making of it, was just that technique of distraction to kind of give a bit of a scare. And the one that I really liked was where Laurie kind of backs up next to, it's either a closet or just a doorway, where it's dark within the doorway, but then they slowly turn the light up and you see Michael Myers' face in that doorway. And
yeah, they used a dimmer for it. It's probably the most effective shot in the entire movie.
Yeah, I really liked that scene, so that was a good one. But Loomis comes in and basically just fires away at Michael, right?
Does one shot and then he backs off, right? Or his mask comes off, so it makes you wonder can he kill without his mask on? Because he has to get his mask back on before he can try and attack again.
Well, if I remember correctly as well, Loomis has a revolver, and I think he fires 7 rounds.
Well, in the sequel, he keeps telling everybody, "I shot him 6 times."
Right.
Yeah.
But you count it,
Sometimes they
it's
accidentally
actually 7
put
rounds.
the sound in there 7 times, but yeah, it was only 6.
I was really interested to find out, too, that Donald Pleasance was asking John Carpenter, basically for some motivation here. So when I go out to look and my reaction is like, oh my God, he's gone, or I knew this was going to happen. And John Carpenter I think they said, well, let's film it both ways and see how it plays out. And they really liked the take where he was like, I knew this would happen. And that's kind of the expression that Donald Pleasance has on his face. And a lot of the scenes after that, where they're basically showing all of these empty hallways, empty living room, house, was done on the editing room floor, where it was like pieces that had been cut from other scenes. They basically spliced back in at the end to kind of give it a sense that, it's like he's been in these places. Is he still there? Where is he now?
Or is he behind you? Because
Right. Really, really effective.
And that's what they wanted to do, is leave it on that note.
Yeah.
So when you left the theater, if you were really scared, you were like, well, is he going to be at my car?
Right.
Is he going to be at my house when I get home?
Yeah. And I think that's a great use of suspense and technique, that if you can make something that applies to people as like in the car, is there somebody behind me, or if you're babysitting and you get a phone call, is that call coming from inside the house?
I think if they would have just left it the way it is, and there's other portions of the sequels, there's elements that I kind of like and some that I really don't, but if they would have just kept this by itself the way it was, I think it's more powerful.
So we have essentially concluded Act 3, gentlemen. Congratulations. We've made it through Halloween.
Sure did.
Yeah.
I think one other reason why it worked, too, is if you go back and watch, when they start the shots, it's very wide shots. And as the movie goes on, the camera gets tighter and tighter. So it's building tension as well in just the space on the screen. So it builds tension for the viewer.
So it's crowding you, so to speak.
Yeah, as time's going on. So I think that's it's really effective use of the camera.
Yeah, your sound quality is changing again, Rick.
I'm right here. I haven't moved.
You'll hear it once I play this back. I'll leave these parts in so you can hear what I'm talking about.
I believe
Going back
you.
to
I'm just
Rick's point earlier about the consistency of the movie. It's just like, I think Friday the 13th is a more consistent series, because it's just like once you start trying to go in and explain Michael more and more on every movie, he becomes less and less scary. While Jason is just Jason until Friday the 13th Part 9, Jason goes to hell. Like where they tried to explain him away. It's just, I just like the killer just being the killer, and then you have a new group or a new cast each movie that they're coming in and
there's
getting for.
Definitely some strange things to discuss with Jason, because when he comes back to life out of the lake, he's a boy.
Yeah.
So what? Yeah. He grows and finds grown-up clothes, and
that's for another time.
Right. Has himself a little shack that he hangs out in and drinks beer, and who knows?
Well, I mean, what's Michael doing between each Halloween,
I don't know.
Just takes off the mask and sets it aside, and then he dusts it like Indiana Jones with his hat every time he knows it's about time to go on an adventure.
He was sitting there looking to this night, knowing.
Well, I mean, based off of the later films where he's constantly back in the insane asylum, maybe he's like Murdoch in the A-Team, where he just gets recaptured and put back in the asylum, and he just has to escape every Halloween.
Now I would like to see that A-Team episode where they bust Michael out because they need someone to fly.
Well, it's like I was talking about, if the government could use him to drop him off and use him like a rescue team, drop him off in the jungle to fight the predator. All right, boys, any final thoughts or anything you'd like to share? I know, Rick, you mentioned that you've actually had a conversation with John Carpenter before, or conversations.
Yeah, but we didn't even talk about Halloween. We were talking about Westerns. That's why I knew that, like, Red River, he loves that movie. And then Rio Bravo was pretty much the premises for Assault on Precinct 13. Because I did a review on Assault on Precinct 13 and I sent it to him, and then he started gabbing back and forth with it. And we were just talking about Westerns. We didn't talk about any They Live or Halloween. And just, he's an interesting filmmaker in his point of view on things. And just, I think the horror fan base respects him and sees him as the filmmaker that he is. I just don't think that outside of the horror film, or maybe like since you love 80s action, so you see Carpenter and how he's, with Escape from New York and those characters, can appreciate him. I don't think overall, though, when you're looking as a film lover, he gets enough credit that he should get.
Would you guys have a favorite Carpenter film? Because this would probably be mine.
Well, I mean, you have tattoo work to validate that, right?
That's true. Yeah, but that's more about the iconography of Michael Myers, just because even though this is obviously the best one, I love all the Halloween movies, even the worst ones like Halloween 6 is probably one of my favorites, just because of how terrible it is.
I still haven't fully paid attention to like Halloween Kills or Halloween Ends.
Yeah, those are troubling movies, just because each of them are completely different than the one before. I can't stand anytime somebody's a director and they're like, oh, we're going to make it in a trilogy, and that doesn't seem like they have any idea what the sequels are going to be like. Right. Same thing with like the new Star Wars movies. It's just, right. It's like, don't make it a trilogy.
I think with the last trilogy, the reason why I got so much oomph is because John Carpenter did give the blessing for it and did, kind of get involved behind the scenes to let those movies go out, because he said that the writing on it was much better than all the other sequels and reboots, and part of the mythology of Michael, that he thought it fell more in line, that if he would have wrote sequels towards this story back then, that this would have fell more in line with his vision.
Yeah, I mean, I still love Halloween 2018. There's something to like about each of them, but as a trilogy, as a whole, it just falls very flat. Like, I think Halloween Kills is one of my least favorite Halloween movies because it's right down the middle of the road, and there's too much commentary on like modern day life. So much so that there's like people getting mob mentality and stuff like that. It's just like, I'm not watching Halloween to get a sense of what modern day life is. I'm trying to escape. Right. So it's just, and it's like 2.5 hours long. It's extremely long. Well, this one's like, 90 minutes? Like, it's a very lean machine.
Yeah. Plus the violence that they added to Michael's kills. And I'm not offended by violence or whatnot, but what made Halloween work so well, the original, was that, it could be creepy and scary without being so violent, to where the kills, like in the last 3 movies, are just like so over the top, or so, I mean, he's gone very Jason, if not more, in these movies than he did in the original. In the original, I think it leaves more to the imagination. And that's why I think Halloween for Carpenter is probably my favorite Carpenter movie, followed by, which you guys will probably be surprised, is Christine. Even though he didn't write Christine, Stephen King was still, they were working together when that book wasn't even done yet.
Carpenter directed Christine?
Yep. Yeah.
I did not know that.
And the book wasn't even done yet. Like they were collaborating on kind of what was going on. So when you read the book, which is by itself, visually, if you've already seen the movie, you're like, oh, that'd be really cool. But it would be a much longer movie. But both of them, I think because of the way they've got released and the content that's in them, they can stand alone as kind of companion pieces without, taking away from the other one. Where sometimes when you see a movie that's derived from a book, you're like, oh, the book is much better, or the movie's much better. I think with Christine, they can kind of work in their own universes without, and complement each other rather than taking away from each other.
Well, it's interesting you helping me connect those dots now, because I've kind of just been flipping through the old mental Rolodex, but there are several sound pieces, background music, scoring even in Christine, that now that I know John Carpenter was involved, I can hear those same sounds like in other John Carpenter films. So it's interesting. I have to go back and rewatch it so I can find some more things that tie in.
But the fact that, he has a very specific style when it comes to the look and feel of his movies, but the sound, is also completely attributed to him as well. But it's just like, is there any other director in time? Because, obviously you think of Spielberg's scores, but those are always John Williams normally. But, this
James Cameron has a lot of sounds that are kind of unique.
Did he create them?
Probably not, but, it's just sort of linked to this film's.
But you know what I mean? Like, that he is able to, most directors, you get a sense of what their films look like, and you're like, all right, this definitely feels like a Fincher film or a Spielberg or something like that. But with Carpenter, not only do you get away that it looks and feels, but the sound is him. It's not something he has to collaborate with. It's something he's developing.
See, with Carpenter, I don't know if I could pick it out of a group of directors by just watching it, but definitely by listening. I could pick out a Carpenter film, with the exception of Christine, obviously, since I didn't know that was one. But yeah, for my favorite Carpenter films, I was just talking with Rick about. I like his collaboration with Kurt Russell. So, The Thing, Escape from New York, and Big Trouble in Little China are probably my 3 favorite Carpenter films. I'm not going to, bypass They Live because it stands alone on its own little pedestal, but. As far as the body of work, then I would have to go with those 3 as my favorites.
Going back to your guys' podcast with the 80s theme, it's just like, yes, this is 78, but John Carpenter is very much the decade of the 80s, because all his major hits after that are in there, and then it's once it becomes the 90s that he's kind of fallen off to the wayside. But,
yeah, Halloween kind of launched him, right? It's like
yeah.
Dark Star, sort of early entry into the film business. Assault on Precinct 13 wasn't widely accepted in the U.S., but found a good audience in overseas, which I find to be interesting. I'd really be curious to know if Dan has any insight on that one. Maybe it was such a hit in the UK because they looked at it almost like a Western, like the Wild West of the United States, and how violent they are, because England was not so violent.
We'll also have to talk to Dan when he comes back to see if Halloween was, and I can't recall if it is or not, because I did a paper on it before, but where Dan was talking about the video nasties for
right.
VHS.
Yeah.
If Halloween if that was edited or if that was good and kind of flew under the radar.
Well, I feel like we've done a pretty good job of throwing some analysis at this film and doing a little bit of deep dive. Nicely done.
We did it.
Well, thank you. It was fun.
Yeah.